Good morning, everybody. 7 o'clock here in the UK, nearly 5 weeks into the war in Ukraine, and Russian forces say they are scaling back their offensive around the capital, Kiev. But a warning from the US and UK not to take that promise at face value. We'll be speaking to the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab to get his take very shortly, and an extraordinary interview to bring you with our Chief Correspondent Stuart Ramsey, who'll be speaking to us for the first time about that moment he and his team came under fire reporting the war in Ukraine. Plus, a maternity scandal that left hundreds of babies dead or brain damaged. The findings of a report are due this morning. We'll talk to Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, and the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. And we'll discuss the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown's idea to fix the cost of living crisis. It is Wednesday, the 30th of March. Repositioning, not withdraw. As new pictures emerge of the besieged city of Mariupol, the US reacts to Russia's latest troop movements.
I'm live in Istanbul, the morning after peace talks. President Zelensky has described them as positive, but said they don't drown out the sound of Russian bombs.
The worst maternity scandal in NHS history. A major report will reveal the true scale of failings at a hospital trust where hundreds of babies died or were left brain damaged.
Nobody should have to leave that hospital without their baby, knowing it was avoidable. The pain is indescribable.
Remembering the Spin Kings, stars of sport and showbiz, will come together in Melbourne today to pay tribute to cricket legend Shane Warne at his state memorial.
Really pleased for all his fans throughout the world who are going to be able to join in giving a really good farewell.
Laser-focused fan trouble. Egypt says that players face racial abuse as Mohamed Salah's penalty miss sees them miss out on the World Cup.
What is it? Tells me what? What's wrong with me?
TV's biggest moments this year will bring you the TV BAFTA nominations live this hour. Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world, we'll speak to our Chief Correspondent Stuart Ramsey to hear from him for the first time since his team came under fire close to Kiev, as well as Ukraine's ambassador to the UK.
I have no authority here, Jackie Weaver. No authority at all.
She's just kicked him out. No, she's kicked him out. No, she's kicked him out.
And one of the viral moments of the pandemic. But an investigation finds Jackie Weaver did not have the authority to virtually eject councillors. We'll speak to the overnight internet sensation a bit later in the programme. Good morning, everybody. Nearly 5 weeks into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin's forces have promised to significantly scale back military activity around the capital, Kiev, following peace talks in Turkey. But the Ukrainian president says he's sceptical and can't trust the latest promise from Russia. Let's have a look at the key developments you're waking up to on the programme this morning. UK and US intelligence say that Moscow has started scaling back troops from the Ukrainian capital, but only so they can intensify its offensive in other parts of the country. Excuse me, goodness. It comes after peace talks between the two countries in Istanbul yesterday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called them positive. The UK continues to sanction Russian oligarchs. A super yacht worth £38 million, owned by a Russian businessman, has been held after it arrived in London and docked at Canary Wharf. The latest satellite images of Ukraine show thousands of people queuing outside a grocery store in the besieged city of Mariupol. The port city in the southeast of the country has become a focal point for Russian aggression, which has left its citizens sheltering without much food or water due to the constant threat of shelling. Similarly, thousands have also been fleeing the northern city of Chernihiv that's been devastated by Russian forces, despite Moscow's promise to scale back military operations in the country. The President Zelensky, has urged his citizens to exercise caution amid the still existing threat of shelling.
We can call the signals we hear from the negotiating platform positive, but these signals do not drown out the blows of Russian shells. Of course, we see all the risks. Of course, we see no reason to trust the words of certain representatives of a state that continues to fight for our destruction. Ukrainians are not naive people. Ukrainians have already learned, both during these 34 days of invasion and over the past 8 years of the war in Donbass, that only a concrete result can be trusted.
Has there been some movement by some Russian units away from Kyiv in the last day or so? Yeah, we think so. Small numbers. But we believe that this is a repositioning, not a real withdrawal, and that we all should be prepared to watch for a major offensive against other areas of Ukraine. It does not mean that the threat to Kyiv is over.
I'm going to be talking to the Ukrainian ambassador later on in the programme as well, of course. And don't forget, Stuart Ramsey will be joining us to tell us what his experience was in Kiev. Apologies for my little cough. It's one of those hangovers I'm sure lots of you have had from COVID. We'll get through it together. Ali's standing by for us in Istanbul this morning. Good morning to you, Alistair. So do we take at face value the latest from the Russians on peace talks?
No, I think both Ukrainians and the world will want to actually see the Russians putting into practice what they've suggested they will do. And that was an announcement here yesterday, a surprise announcement, it has to be said, from the Russian Deputy Defence Minister, saying that they would withdraw their forces from around the capital, Kyiv and Chernihiv, in order to give trust to the Ukrainians for further peace talks. Now, the question or not is whether or not that is a genuine compromise by Moscow and whether they follow through on it, or whether it is a strategic necessity, given that Russian forces have failed to entirely encircle Kiev and failed to make any progress into the centre of it. And so I think what we could be faced with is the Russian reality that they do need to withdraw in order to regroup if they wanted to attack again. Having said all that, it sounds rather pessimistic, there was a genuine feeling of optimism after the talks ended around lunchtime yesterday, that both sides are starting to make some concessions that are palatable to each other, and that we are moving towards a point where, you know, perhaps even Zelensky and Putin can meet in person. I still think we're quite far away from that, but I do think that the gap is narrowing.
Thanks very much indeed. Just to underline what we're telling you about that super yacht seized yesterday, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps announcing that this £38 million super yacht belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman had been detained in London. UK officials boarded the 58.5 metre long Phi, PHI, as it was moored in Canary Wharf. The pictures, with the Transport Secretary taking the opportunity to take some selfies and some snaps. Around 9:30, we'll speak to our chief correspondent, as I said, Stuart Ramsey, and his team for the first time following the narrow escape from gunfire near the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. Meantime, still to come on the programme for you this morning in just a few moments, joined on the sofa by the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab. We'll be talking about the Shrewsbury scandal, Partygate, and of course, the latest from Ukraine. Shortly after, the chair of the Health Select Committee and former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt will give me his thoughts on what we can expect from that maternity report. We're expecting it around about 10 o'clock this morning. And in the next hour, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, will give us his take on the scandal. We'll also be asking what he makes of those Westminster COVID fines. But the true scale of findings at an NHS hospital trust where hundreds of babies died or were left brain damaged will be revealed this morning. A major review into failings of maternity care at Shrewsbury and Telford is expected to blame a culture that favoured natural births and repeatedly failed to monitor babies properly. Here's Becky Johnson.
Across Shropshire, there are children missing.
It's just sad. You know, he should be here enjoying the swings and the slide with every other child.
Hayley's son, Jack, would be 7 by now, but he only lived for 11 hours.
When he was in intensive care, I used to always hold his hand. So when I stroke his handprint, I feel like I'm still holding his hand.
He died due to fatal errors.
Angry more than anything, because I know that if I'd have had a cesarean, he would be here playing on this park today. And that's what gets you so angry and upset.
Jack is one of hundreds of babies who died or were left brain damaged. An independent report will reveal the full scale of the scandal after parents fought for the truth. For many years, they've been demanding to know why so many babies died, what was going on inside these hospitals, how was it allowed to happen. The report has examined serious failings over 2 decades at this NHS trust.
There's always going to be a Sophia-shaped hole in my heart in our lives, and I can't change that. It's painful.
Midwives didn't listen to Steph until it was too late.
The cause of her death was the lack of oxygen. That wouldn't have happened if they'd have come to me as soon as I arrived.
She's determined it must never happen again.
Nobody should have to leave that hospital without their baby, knowing it was avoidable. The pain is indescribable.
The hospital trusts say they take full responsibility, but change will come too late for so many families. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Telford.
As I was saying, that full report. We're expecting it to be published around about 10 o'clock this morning. We do have reporters on the story for you, and as soon as we get more information, we'll bring it to you. We're going to be speaking to the former Health Secretary about it. We're going to be speaking to the Deputy Prime Minister about it, and we're also going to be speaking to the Shadow Health Secretary about it. Babies dying needlessly. How on earth could that happen? More on that to come. Meantime, a state memorial is due to take place later this morning at Melbourne Cricket Ground for Australian cricketing legend Shane Warne, who died earlier this month at the age of 52. In cricket, Warne was best known for that delivery against England batter Mike Gatting in the first Ashes Test in 1993. Now known as the ball of the century. Didn't know it was coming, did he? And here's Shane Warne. Oh, there you go, Shane Warne reflecting on his retirement and his home ground in Melbourne, where the memorial is to take place.
We all decided to retire in the same Test match, which was pretty special. And Melbourne, Sydney couldn't have gone any better. For me, that Melbourne day one in Melbourne was probably, as far as Test matches goes and days go for me, that was just about as good as it got. You know, it's my backyard, the MCG.
I think for a lot of us, especially our family, it's a great honour to have it at the MCG. He's done a lot of great things here. It's where he got his 700th wicket. He's made a lot of Victorians, Melburnians and Australians proud here on the very ground we're standing on.
Really pleased for all his fans throughout the world who are going to be able to join in giving a really good farewell.
Nicole standing by for us in Melbourne this morning. Hi, Nicole, good morning. Star-studded cast list wanting to pay their respects.
That's right. Some 50,000 people are turning up for a celebration of Shane Warne's life, and also, as you said, to see many of the superstars in the world of entertainment and sport and media who will be here, many of them appearing in person, others via video link. A musical tribute as well, with Elton John said to be performing, as well as Ed Sheeran and Chris Martin from Coldplay. So in terms of a state funeral, no one here has ever seen anything like it, being broadcast in Australia on all networks and around the world. We'll also hear from his former fiancée, Liz Hurley, the actress and model, family members, of course, and many people will be remembering his legacy and his contribution to the world of international Test cricket, how he elevated the role of the spin bowler and leg spinning, brought it back from the dead, so to speak. Not only was he well known here in Australia and in the UK, he also played in India for the Rajasthan Royals, played in the UK as well in Hampshire, and transcended borders. He was known around the world. He had friends like Mick Jagger and Hugh Jackman, for example, and he'll be remembered and celebrated here in Melbourne tonight.
OK, thanks very much indeed. We're going to be dipping into the memorial service. We're expecting Elton John to play, and we're also expecting to hear from people like, I've said Elton John, I think Ed Sheeran as well, not sure, we'll find out. Robbie Williams as well. So lots of stars wanting to pay their respects to Shane Warne. As I said, dipping into that in our 9 o'clock hour of The Breakfast Show here on Sky News this morning. Meantime, let's take a look at some of today's other headlines for you now. A gunman's killed at least 5 people in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv in the 3rd shooting in the country in just a matter of days. Police said the attacker had been on a motorcycle and opened fire at 2 locations before being shot dead. Israel's Prime Minister said the country is facing a new wave of terrorism. And an inquest has concluded that the Formula One boss, Max Mosley, shot himself. Got some pictures of that for you after finding out his cancer was terminal. Mr Mosley died in May of 2021 in his home in London. The coroner's court heard he enjoyed a final meal with his wife before writing a suicide note. He'd been in debilitating pain. Deputy PM is with us now, also Justice Secretary Dominic Raab. Mr Raab, good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Can we start with Ukraine, if possible, please? Russia's saying that they don't want to put Kiev at military risk, and so they're going to move their troops away. How much faith are we putting in those words?
Well, I don't think a lot. We judge the Russian military machine by its actions, not just its words. There's obviously some scepticism that it will regroup to attack again, rather than seriously engage in diplomacy or anything of that nature. Of course, the door to diplomacy will always be left ajar, but I don't think you can trust what is coming out of the mouth of Putin's war machine.
To that end, talking about diplomacy, what do we make of suggestions that the Ukrainian peace mission were poisoned?
Well, look, we've seen those very credible reports. We don't know a huge amount about the contextual detail to it, but it's very worrying, and we're looking to clarify the situation with our allies.
Talk to me about suggestions that mercenaries from Syria are being recruited at $7,000 each to fight for the Russians.
Well, we've heard all sorts of reports of that. We know that the Russians have a long history and are very prevalent around the world in deploying mercenaries. They've done it hired hands, if you like, as you suggested. The Wagner Group is very well known, Libya in particular, but across Africa, and of course in the context of Ukraine. And it is a worrying sign. But it also probably shows you how dependent they've become on other fighters because of the weakness and the fragility of the forces, the professional forces, and their reliance on conscripts, which we're starting to see play out a bit in Ukraine. Certainly the Russian war machine, which had a pretty fearsome reputation, has been found to stutter and stumble in at least the early stages of this campaign. So it is probably also a sign of weakness or fragility.
OK. Is there anything that the West can do about it?
Look, it's very difficult. We'll have to address that. We've known that there are asymmetric forces, so hired mercenaries as well as conventional forces in Russia. There are a whole range. With Russia, you have to deal with a whole range of possibilities. We set that out in our integrated review. You've got the fact that they hire mercenaries. They've got the fact that they engage in cyber, the fact that they engage in poisoning. We've seen that in the past as well. The whole gamut comes with Russia, and that's why it is such an unconventional adversary, but actually why I think the UK with our allies are well placed, because we do look at every aspect of the battle and the struggle. You've been to The Hague recently to try to start to talk about war crimes. That's a long process. it will be a long process, but we've tried to lead the way. If you look at the response to Ukraine, we've got sanctions, we've got the humanitarian response and relief, we've got the visas position. On top of that, the PM was very keen with the Foreign Secretary and myself that we support the International Criminal Court, which is looking at the allegations and the reports of war crimes in Ukraine. So the UK, and I went out to The Hague and we offered support. We've offered financial and technical support to the ICC prosecutor. On top of that, last Thursday, I hosted a meeting in The Hague. 38 countries joined, and we said on the basis of our package, what can we do together to make sure that there is no impunity for war crimes in Ukraine? The ICC prosecutor was there, and I think it's a good example of where, again, Britain is leading the way. And you're right, it will take some time.
Yeah, I mean, the will is there, but it's very difficult to prove a war crime.
It is. So things like satellite imagery, not just to prove the crime, but who's responsible for it. Preserving evidence in the fluid situation of a war zone is very difficult, which is why that support is important now. It's about what we can do now to preserve that evidence. And that also tells the commanders and Putin himself, everyone in between, that they're at serious risk of ending up in the dock of a court and behind bars if they engage in further war crimes or indeed for any other action that they've taken.
Are you confident that war crimes will be proven at the end of this war in Ukraine?
Well, this is for the ICC to decide, but we've been here before in Yugoslavia, in Rwanda, in Sierra Leone, and the UK has got a long history dating back to Nuremberg of supporting war crimes accountability. And again, the Prime Minister has, with me and with the Foreign Secretary, led the way in saying we must have no impunity for war crimes in Ukraine.
Is that a yes? You feel that some people will be held accountable with war crimes?
I certainly hope so. I think for any crimes there should be accountability. And I think that message needs to go out now. And what we hope is it will have a deterrent impact on those commanders that are at risk of facing illegal orders to engage in attacks which will harm civilians.
Meantime, back home, you're also bringing in new legislation today. Tell us about that.
Well, we're announcing the outcome of our root and branch review of parole. There have been a number of celebrated cases which have created huge concern and anxiety for victims and the public. We think of the Wall Boys case, Colin Pitchfork, and we said we would. We said that we would do a root and branch review. I'm announcing the details of what were our proposals today. They will look at everything from the role of victims. I think their voice should be heard more clearly during the parole process, but above all, particularly for dangerous offenders, I want to make sure the parole process is re-anchored back into the primary and overriding focus on protecting the public, particularly for the top tier of more dangerous offenders, where the risk and assessing risk of what they might do in the future is so difficult to predict with any precision.
OK, you mentioned the visa applications, the homes for Ukrainians. Only 1,000 people have been allowed in so far, I believe. That's what the Minister was telling us yesterday.
I think it's 1,000 applications, I understand, per day, and we're going to, this week, set out the data so people can see how many.
So none at the moment?
Well, no, I don't know the answer because we're about to publish the data. I think there's 200,000 sponsors that have come forward. My understanding is that around 1,000 applications are processed per day. You're rightly asking, well, yeah, but how many have actually been offered? That data is now going to be put forward very shortly, I understand. OK,
talk to me about Partygate. Here it comes. We've heard from the police. They made a statement. How significant is it that they've started to issue fines?
Well, I think we said that we needed to have the independent Shrewsbury review. We respected that the Met would be free to, of course, follow its investigation. They've come forward and made clear that there are 20 fixed penalty notices.
So far?
Say again? So far. And the Prime Minister has already been clear. He's taken responsibility for the things that shouldn't have happened in number 10. He's apologised for it. And more than that, he's overhauled number 10. That has already happened. Of course, we wait to see the outcome of the conclusion of the Met process, and there will be an opportunity then for an update on Shrewsbury's report and full transparency around that.
Yeah,
but I don't want, again...
No, we don't want to... Yeah, we know all the lies, that hyperbole and talking about hypothetical questions, all that sort of question. My question to you was, what is the significance of the police statement from yesterday?
Well, that 20 individuals have been given, yes, inevitably the fixed penalty notice is for those that have breached the regulations, and we stand by and support the fact that there should be the Met process, the Shrewsbury process, and accountability for this.
Yeah, because the Prime Minister, of course, said previously all guidance was followed completely in number 10. How can that be true, and yet people also having broken the law?
Well, I don't know the the full facts of the fixed penalty notices and the details of those individual cases, but the Prime Minister was telling the House of Commons and the public what he knew to the best of his ability. We obviously had all the questions, the claims that were made. That's precisely why the Sue Gray inquiry was set up, and that's why, where there have been credible allegations, they've gone to the police. It's precisely because of those questions and those challenges that those processes have run their course, and we, of course, support that.
Yeah, but on at least 20 occasions, the law was broken at number 10 Downing Street. Where does the buck stop with that?
Well, the PM has already said, I mean, ultimately individuals take responsibility, but the PM has already said he takes responsibility and he apologised for the fact that things happened in number 10 that shouldn't have done. And more than that, he's overhauled the number 10 operation. People have been asking me already today, yes, but what happens to those that have had a fixed penalty notice? Many people have already left number 10 Downing Street. And I think you can see from his actions and the fact that these inquiries have taken place that we believe, engage and indeed embrace the transparency and accountability that the public rightly expect.
Yeah, but the fact remains, Deputy Prime Minister, that it's an actual fact that 20 people broke the law in Downing Street when we were in the middle of a pandemic, when people couldn't bury their loved ones, when they couldn't see their loved ones in nursing homes, care homes, and they died. 20 people broke the law. Who should be responsible for that? Where does the buck stop with that?
Well, ultimately, individuals, we're all responsible for what we do, and that's why the fixed penalty notices, they're the appropriate punishment that the Met have handed out. The PM has been clear that he recognises that that things went wrong. He's apologised for that. And we've got the ongoing process to determine any other individuals, both through the Met Police investigation, anyone else that has broken the law, and indeed there will be an opportunity for Sue Gray and that inquiry to update their findings, and the PM's been very clear there'll be full transparency around that.
Yeah, but what does it say about the culture when at least 20 fines have been issued so far? More to come, we're told by the Met. What does it say about the culture at number 10 at the time?
Well, look, these things are deeply regrettable. What I would also say is that...
What does it say about the culture at the time?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but my experience, and I was in and out of number 10, we've had this conversation before, was that, look, I'm not going to excuse anything that happened that shouldn't have done. We've been very clear about that. The punishments have already been meted out. But my experience...
Some of them.
Some of them, of course, I accept that. My experience... and just telling you honestly, firsthand, was the incredible pressure and hard work and dedication of the overwhelming majority of people working in number 10. And I'm always quite careful, whilst engaging and embracing the accountability that's right to take place, to say that it's not right to tar all the civil servants who worked so hard during this pandemic.
Not doing that, just saying.
Well, no, I think it's fair because I don't accept that the sort of caricature is right. I saw a lot of people working incredibly long hours under incredible pressure, doing their very best.
And on at least 12 occasions, they broke the law. 12 separate events. We're not talking about the Prime Minister particularly because we don't know whether he's got a fine or not as yet, although we're promised that he will. And I'm not going to ask you whether he should step down or not because I know what you'll say. What I'm saying is, should we be anxious about the culture of number 10 at the time?
Well, look, I think there clearly were things that got wrong. That's why the PM overhauled the operation number 10 Downing Street. It's well known the individuals that have come in and the individuals, at least some of them that have left. And that's because he takes it so seriously. And we do take it so seriously. All I'm just saying is that my experience, say this across government, and government gets things wrong and civil servants and Lord knows politicians get things wrong as well. If you're asking me, what I saw during the pandemic, huge number of people working incredibly long hours under incredible pressure to do the right thing.
OK. Just before I let you go, from Friday, if you had a cough or a cold or other symptoms that were flu-like, would you test for COVID?
It would, for me personally, I'd take a judgment call on where I was going. And I think that's the common sense and the process of getting back to living with COVID and us taking responsibility.
And do you think that everybody should be able to do that with a free lateral flow test?
Look, we can't continue to provide the lateral flow tests free in the way that we did before. I think there are a lot of emergency measures which were quite right during the midst of and the crucible of the pandemic, which we'll have to phase out. I'm afraid that follows, and that's because we've got all the other things that we're funding as we build back after the pandemic. We've got the COVID backlog, which the Chancellor has funded and the Health Secretary is tackling. I know that we've got the court recovery. We've got all those other things. So it is part of the transition out of the emergency pandemic back to normal.
And I know we're out of time, but there is one other thing I must just ask you about briefly, and it's the report that's coming out at 10 o'clock today as far as babies. So many babies having died. I can't even, as a parent, you're a parent, can't even begin to imagine the suffering that those parents must have gone through. How do you reassure pregnant women and their partners right now, today, that they are safe to go into hospitals to have their babies?
Well, look, we do want to provide that reassurance. I can only imagine the heartbreak and then the anxiety that spreads across expectant mothers. And I think what you'll see is through, I'm sure it's the Health Secretary that will be setting this out, the practical measures combined with the recognition of what's gone wrong to provide that reassurance and confidence, I think not just amongst mothers, but amongst the public at large. It is a really heartbreaking series of issues that we've had to grapple with.
I know you've got a busy day ahead. I must let you go. Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you. Quick look at what's happening with the papers, reflecting on what the Deputy PM's just been saying to us. Russia's give up on conquest of Kiev is on the front page of the Telegraph as Moscow redeploys troops away from the capital, citing efforts to build trust in peace talks. But the Metro describes it as Russian roulette, as the US urges people to be clear-eyed about what is happening on the ground. The Times also looks at the US and Britain's doubts over the Kremlin's intentions. That's the latest as well from the Financial Times. Egypt's Football Association says its players were racially abused and their team bus was attacked as they lost out on a place at the World Cup final to Senegal. Fans shone lasers in the eyes of Liverpool star Mohamed Salah in the penalty shootout after a 0-0 draw, with him missing, helping Senegal go through. Salah's Anfield teammate Sadio Mane scored the winning kick to send the West African nation to its third World Cup. Ali's here to tell us more about it. Hi, Ali. So they were shining these laser lights into his eyes and he couldn't see?
Yeah, I mean...
How's that fair?
I mean, you could see those pictures, the green dots all over him. We think it was from the Senegal fans. As you say, clearly this is something that needs to be looked into. And to give you a sense of the stakes, I mean, this is a World Cup qualifier between Senegal and Egypt, a famous rivalry. Their match ended 1-1. They're going into the penalties. Mo Salah goes up, their star player, to take this first penalty. And, yeah, as I say, we saw there those green lights on him, and they lost 3-1 in penalties. As you said, Sadio Mane, who's his Liverpool teammate, winning that winning penalty. But lasers have been a problem before in football. You might remember last year, the Euros semi-final against Denmark, and the FA were charged £25,000 because of lasers being shone at Kasper Schmeichel, the Danish goalkeeper's face at the time. So this has been an ongoing issue. I think, you know, it's obviously a good night for Senegal. We can't forget that, and we don't know what would have happened if it hadn't been for the lasers. But clearly, I think questions are going to be ongoing about how we make sure this doesn't happen again. And as you mentioned, you know, questions around whether there was a racial element to this, which is obviously very serious and is going to be an important part too.
OK. For now, Ali, thanks so much indeed. Ali developing that story for us throughout the course of the morning here on Sky News. I just want to bring you some breaking news as far as the BAFTAs are concerned. Channel 4, the series It's a Sin, is leading the nominations for the BAFTA Television Awards, running for 11 separate gongs. Caroline Frost, standing by for us, was with us earlier in the week to talk about the Oscars. Caroline, I know that you've been monitoring this with us. It's a weird time for them to make these announcements, but there we go. Talk us through it.
OK, well, as you say, the big headline is Russell T Davies's Channel 4 drama, It's a Sin, being just recognised almost across the board. I think we can safely guarantee, Kay, that it will be going home with not just a couple of awards on in May, because it has just caught the imagination. It's his story. It's a huge passion project for Russell T Davies. He said it's the drama that he's been wanting to write all his adult life. It's about the 80s AIDS epidemic and how young gay people specifically were treated, how first there was an era of denial, then confusion and a lot of alienation, and how the young people were made to feel during that time. So, I mean, it's a story that I don't think, I mean, it's been touched on in documentaries. Nobody has given it the attention and the thoroughness of Russell T Davies's drama. And so quite rightly, it's come round finally. It spent years being incubated by him. He took it to different broadcasters. Channel 4 gave him the love that it deserved, and he has been recognised in all these leading nominations. Quite extraordinary. So wonderful luck for him. He was recognised last night in similar categories. It led the board in the Royal Television Society Awards as well. So clearly it has caught a good wind.
Just hearing that Landscapers, Olivia Colman, one of our own productions, of course, here on Sky, that doing very well as well. I think 7 nominations.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I mean, anything that Olivia Colman touches turns to gold, doesn't it? I mean, she is our blossoming national treasure, if she's not already. She's an Oscar winner. She's a Golden Globe winner. She's an Emmy winner. And it may be that she is yet another BAFTA winner for that wonderful portrayal, together with David Thewlis. I mean, it's a beautiful drama about... We do seem to have a fascination at the moment with people who skirt around the edges of society and don't always follow a mainstream route. And this was a story of a couple who decided that they were the best people to be responsible for their family's inheritance, and that they would spend it their very own way. Not always in accordance with the law, I should add, but the story is a thrilling one, and it was beautifully told, and it is still available on the Now platform. So yes, another gong possibly for Olivia Colman.
Yeah, I remember in W1A all that time ago when she used to say, not a problem, whatever the question was. And look where she is now. When are the actual awards?
Right, so they are in May, on the Sunday, the 8th of May. Host yet to be announced. We had Richard Ayoade last year, but I think everyone is looking forward to these awards this year because TV has proved itself over the last 2 years not to be the poor relation of film anymore, but very much on equal peggings. And we also know, Kay, that award ceremonies are not as predictable and tedious as they may have been thought of before.
OK, thanks very much indeed, Caroline. We'll chat to you again later. For now, thank you. Lots to talk to the chair of the Health Select Committee about now, and of course former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt. Mr Hunt, thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. We're going to hear later on today what happened in Shrewsbury, but you know the headline is lots of babies died when they didn't need to.
Yes, I think it's going to be a very sobering morning. I commissioned this report back in 2016 when 2 families came to see me and they were worried about the circumstances surrounding the death of their children. And I'm afraid it mushroomed, having started investigating the complaints from 23 families. Don Ockenden ended up looking at nearly 2,000 cases. But one thing I would say, Kay, it's very important. I was listening to your interview just now with Dominic Raab. The NHS facilitates the birth of nearly 600,000 babies every year. The vast majority are totally safe, and indeed they're getting safer. But I think today's report is going to be a very sobering read.
Yeah, we saw what happened in Mid Staffordshire, and that was, of course, under a previous government's watch. You were in charge, weren't you, when we saw what happened in Shropshire? Learning from experience, what can we learn about why we didn't learn the lessons of what happened? I know slightly different circumstances, but the bottom line is a life is a life is a life.
Absolutely. I mean, baby deaths have come down by about a third over the last decade, but we're still 27th out of 38 OECD countries when it comes to infant mortality. So countries like Hungary and Slovenia do better than us. And I think I haven't seen the report, but I think what we'll see is that staffing is very important. My select committee said we needed 2,000 more midwives and 500 more doctors. Today, unfortunately, the government is going to vote down an amendment to the health bill, which would mean that we always trained enough doctors and nurses for the future, which is very, very disappointing. But staffing is one. Another is this so-called natural births ideology, which put pressure on mothers to avoid C-sections, even when that might have been the safer option. And I think that is something which, thankfully, the NHS has now removed all targets associated with reducing C-sections. But Shrewsbury and Telford was one of the trusts which had one of the lowest C-section rates in the NHS. And the third thing is the blame culture. I mean, even in this inquiry, Donna Ockenden believes that doctors, nurses, midwives were pressurised not to be open with her and told there could be professional reprisals if they were. And too often in the NHS, it's difficult for doctors and nurses to speak out. It's the thing they really want to do to learn from mistakes, but we make it too hard.
Is a fourth point funding as well, given the first part of the Ockenden report, which was published last year, as you know, an extra £95 million, I believe, was made available by NHS England in funding for maternity care. There wasn't enough money available.
There's always pressures on funding in all health systems because of the ageing population. Now, of course, the pandemic pressures. But I think if you ask people in the NHS today, they would say that staffing shortfalls is a bigger issue. Sometimes they have the money to pay for doctors, nurses, midwives, but they can't find the people to actually do the roles. And that is because over very many years, we haven't been training enough doctors and nurses. I set up 5 new medical schools, but even that may not have been enough. And that's why I think we need to have a long-term overhaul of our workforce planning, because it takes so long to train people up and you can't just do it overnight.
Yeah. And overseas staff being prevented from coming into the country by a Conservative government.
Well, there is an NHS visa, so it shouldn't be the case that anyone is prevented from coming in. But I think the truth is that immigration and getting doctors from overseas was always a get-out-of-jail card for the NHS over very many years. But now, with the pandemic, we have a 2 million shortage of doctors around the world, a 15 million shortage of nurses. And we've got to be honest and say we're a proper health system. We should be training the number of doctors and nurses we need. And frankly, is it ethical for us to be recruiting so many doctors from much poorer countries where they are often desperately needed at home?
Would you test yourself on Friday after the lateral flows are no longer available if you had a cough or a cold?
Well, I would. I understand why the government says we have to get back to normal. All I would say is that we just need to keep a weather eye on all of this because, you know, we have got a big spike in infections at the moment. It doesn't look like it's translating into people being seriously ill. We have got to get back to normal at some stage, but we need to be prepared to change course very quickly if the situation changes, if we had a new variant, for example. I think the lesson of the pandemic is that you have to be willing to change course quickly if the facts on the ground change.
So are you telling people at home that they should test themselves if they have the symptoms of a cough or of a cold or flu?
Yes, we should. And, you know, that's the same as, you know, taking your temperature if you think you might have flu. I mean, we have got a lot of COVID around. It can be very dangerous indeed, particularly to people who aren't vaccinated. But we are going to have to move, you know, given the billions of pounds that the testing programme is costing. I mean, I'm someone who's criticised aspects of the government's response to the pandemic, but I do recognise we have got to move to some type of normality. So it's a difficult judgment as to when that happens. And I would just say if the situation changes, we might need to look again at that decision.
What about those people that can't afford to buy the tests?
Well, I hope we will find ways to make sure that they are able to access the tests they need.
OK. Talk to me about Partygate before I let you go. Basically, the first tranche of fines are in, 20 separate fines. We don't know if it's 20 separate people. What we do know is that there was a culture at Downing Street where people were breaking the law when we were in the midst of that lockdown that you were just talking about. What's your interpretation of what should happen next?
Well, I think it's very serious, the whole thing. But I think we don't yet know the full facts. There is an investigation going on. You know, we don't know whether the Prime Minister himself is going to be asked to pay a fine. We don't know the full Shrewsbury report. And I'm not saying that to sort of dodge your questions on it, Kay, but I just think that this is a legal situation. And so for people like me to make a judgment on, for example, the Prime Minister's role, I think we do have to know whether the police think that he has broken the law or not, and we don't yet know that.
No, I'm not asking.
But I think
it
is no, I know you're not, but you know, these are very serious issues, and I, like all MPs, I've got a lot of constituents who are very, very angry about them.
Yeah, my question, I suppose, is about the culture at the very heart, very top of government, where at just the first tranche, we've seen that the law was broken on 20 separate occasions at the very heart of government.
And that is wrong. And I don't think we can defend that. I think we can understand the pressures that people were under in Downing Street in the middle of that national emergency, working all the hours that God gives, but we can't defend breaking the rules that they set for everyone else. No, we can't.
OK, good to talk to you. Can I hear one of your little ones in the background there?
You can indeed. I'm about to cycle her to school.
OK, good. I'll better let you do that then. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tamara's here. Morning, Tamara.
Morning, Kate. Well, what's going on with Partygate? Look, Boris Johnson's going to face more tough questions about it at lunchtime at Prime Minister's Questions and later this afternoon in front of the Liaison Committee of MPs. We don't know who got those 20 fines yesterday. The Met Police will not be saying who got one, and it may take a few days for them to land on people's doorsteps. I thought Dominic Raab said something very interesting, which was when you asked about the significance of people at the top of government, whoever they may be, having broken the rules, broken the law, he said the Prime Minister had apologised and he has overhauled Downing Street. So suggesting that some people did lose their jobs because of this poor culture, failures of leadership at the top. Now, this is why it becomes a problem for Boris Johnson if he does get a fine, because people have resigned over breaking the rules, notably the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. So if he does get a fine and tries to ride it out, then he's already facing calls from opposition parties, but that's where it becomes tricky for Tory MPs. Yes, a lot of them were saying he should resign earlier this year, and those calls have calmed down a bit. They all looked very jolly when they were heading out for their dinner at a hotel last night, but the mood could quickly turn if the Prime Minister does get one of those fines and it becomes difficult to reconcile him staying with what others are doing.
The other thing that our viewers this morning, wherever you're watching us, on The Breakfast Show on Sky, is lateral flows.
Yes, so from Friday, the 1st of April, you will no longer be able to get free lateral flow tests from a pharmacy because they are costing a lot of money, and the government says we need to start paring back. There will be some exceptions announced last night. Care homes, NHS staff, people who are clinically vulnerable will still be able to get those tests, but that won't cover everyone who feels that they want one, and it will mean that people who have fixed incomes and aren't able to afford £2 per lateral flow test may have symptoms but not take one. And the Health Secretary has said, look, we have to draw the line somewhere. But you heard Jeremy Hunt there sounding a real note of caution, saying the government needs to keep a close eye on this. Case numbers, according to the ONS survey, have never been higher.
OK. For now, Tamara, thank you. Tomorrow's Take, 9 o'clock. Yeah. Looking forward to it. Thank you. And, of course, we'll have full live coverage of PMQs. That's, of course, at 12 o'clock today. We know that is very popular with you guys. And that is live, unedited, 12 o'clock today here on Sky News. Let's tell you what's happening in Ukraine. The people of Chernihiv have been told they could be getting some relief from a bombardment that has left the city in ruins and thousands barely managing to survive. It's been surrounded by Russian troops, all routes out blocked, and basic supplies have been almost completely exhausted. Our correspondent Sally Lockwood spoke to residents about their struggle to survive and now reports from Lviv.
Any ceasefire will come too late for many here. Most of Chernihiv already destroyed, an unknown number of its residents already dead. In the rubble here, bodies are being covered with blankets. It's too distressing to broadcast. Someone carried away in a makeshift stretcher. The city, on Russia's ruthless path from Belarus to Kyiv, is now surrounded and cut off. Sky News has been sent these pictures to show what that means for people trapped here. This is Yana and her 10-year-old daughter, Polina. Like most here, a bomb shelter is now their home. How do you comfort a child when this is it?
We have a big family here. There are 17 people. We can't go away and leave an 85-year-old grandmother, a mom or a brother with a 2-year-old.
The little food left is being shared around by local volunteers like Xenia, the road barely visible through her shattered windscreen. We managed to speak to her briefly after she'd charged her phone on a generator, which is rationed to 1 hour a day.
Connection here is very bad. When we're hearing the bomb sound, the first thing what we can do, we can call our relatives that live nearby to ask if it's okay. Was it near to your home? And with the absence of the electricity, we don't have the siren.
We've lost Ksenia again. Just as she was describing how desperate things had become in Chernihiv, it's also quite clear that not only are they without power, but they're without internet, phone signal as well, and just almost any ability to communicate with the outside world.
It's little wonder Chernihiv is being called the next Mariupol, the opposite end of the country, but an almost identical humanitarian catastrophe.
Slava Ukraini!
An Azov unit that first began as a far-right voluntary group still holds the centre of the city. One of its fighters, Eli, speaks to me from an undisclosed location in Mariupol.
Putin's pretext for invading Ukraine, for starting this war, was to denazify the country. Was he talking about you?
Me and my comrades were accused as neo-Nazis, ultra-nationalists, far-right-wing, white supremacists, and all of the words like this. Putin declaring that he's going to denazify the Ukraine, or demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. And right now they're bombing the kindergarten, schools, medical facilities.
Before Eli signs off, he says he's confident they can hold Mariupol. But without some hope of a break in fighting, it's unclear how long civilians can hold on for. Sally Lockwood, Sky News, Lviv in Western Ukraine.